Peace in the circle. Non-violence is our plan. Come and join the circle. All people hand in hand. There is strength in the circle. As together we all stand. Come and join the circle. All people hand in hand. There's healing in the circle. Healing on the land. Come and join the circle. All people hand in hand. There is love you in the circle. Love you can understand. Come and join the circle. All people hand in hand. Again, the last paragraph. Maybe not the last paragraph. How about there is healing in the circle? The second to last paragraph again. There is healing in the circle. Healing on the land. Come and join the circle. All people hand in hand. There is love for you in the circle. Love you can understand. Come Good morning, dear community. Today is June 12th in the year 2022, and we are currently in Magnolia Grove Monastery, and today is the last day of our creative arts retreat, or the first day. My name is Sister Brightness, and I always tease saying that I'm part-time brightness, because it's a tall order. And today I'd like to share a little bit about how I incorporate creativity and meditation, and how they're basically the same for me. And normally when we are inspired by art, we tend to learn from the masters. And I was very privileged because throughout my novicehood, I got to learn hands-on, direct classes that were not really in the form of a traditional classroom from a world-renowned artist. Can you guess what this person's name might be? So he's our Zen master, Teknakhan, and we have his altar to the left here, as he recently transitioned into different forms, but actually he's not sitting over there. He's sitting inside each one of us. And I'd like to recount a few stories of how he was able to transmit his creativity to me during my novice days. As many of you may know, Tai is a poet. He also writes calligraphy. But I don't know how many of you know that he's also an excellent chef. And he excels at ping pong. The way he holds ping pong the ping pong racket is already interesting in itself. So normally you would hold the paddle, for example, like this. And the paddle is up thiswards, but he would hold it this way. But very nonchalantly, as if nothing. And his zenness was always present no matter what he did, whether it was drinking a cup of tea, as we often see, or whether it was cooking in the kitchen, or when it was playing ping pong. When sometimes he would surprise the Thais chefs, we take turns cooking for him because he has a special diet, and it's a restricted diet. So there are certain foods where he cannot eat and can't eat, so it doesn't react with the medicines that he has to take. And sometimes he would surprise us by entering into the kitchen and saying, "I'm going to cook today." And of course, we would smile and step to the side, and then Tai would open the refrigerator and see whatever greens and whatever vegetables were there, and he would quickly assemble something very easily, and it would taste delicious. You would think, there's just simple items, and they're the very same items that we use every day, whether it's bok choy, whether it's tofu, mushrooms. But Tai's simplicity and his concentration and his unconditional love that was infused into every action, even before he cooked anything on the fire, just by chopping the vegetables, washing them, leisurely tossing them into the wok, frying or stirring. Each gesture was always an art in itself. And without having to do much, just being in his presence, we already are influenced by the peace and the unconditional love and the understanding that he generates. There were many times where I would expect that he would yell at me because I made so many mistakes. Especially like as a 13-year-old, I was very clumsy and I would drop things or forget things, but he was always so patient. Like one time when Tai wrote a calligraphy for a title of one of his books, it was on a piece of scrap paper, so I assumed that it was just trash. And then can you imagine this frightened 13-year-old novice who is questioned by Tai saying, "My child, where is that piece of paper where I wrote the title of this book?" And I looked at Tai and I was like, do I lie or do I tell him the truth? That's like my first instinct, because as a kid, you're terrified of being yelled at. But how can you lie to a renowned Zen master? So I bit my lip and took a deep breath and I blurted it all out in one quick go. "I'm so sorry, Tai. I think I accidentally threw it away because I thought it was scrap paper." And Tai looked up at me a little bit like, "Oh, okay. Can you get new paper and pen and I'll just write another line?" And I was like, "Huh? That's it? There's no punishment involved? No yelling, 'Why were you so unmindful?' Like everything Tai writes is art, is beautiful," and nothing. Just, okay, he'll write another one. And maybe Tai knew, or maybe Tai didn't know, but these lessons really left an impression in me. And that was probably a lot more powerful in reminding me to remember, to be more mindful. Then, if he had yelled at me, I would have just remembered that he yelled at me, rather than remembered to be more mindful out of my own accord, out of my own wanting to be mindful. And Tai was a real artist he was a real master at the art of happiness. He would often create moments of happiness out of what we would call normal, ordinary moments. For example, he might, on a morning that would seem like it's just any old regular morning, he might say, "My child, come and go look for this brother or this sister and tell this person to cook delicious sweet rice out of 5 different colors." And I was like, wow, normally that's just reserved for holidays or special occasions. And I was thinking to myself, like, today seems like a normal day. But okay, if Tai says so, then that's what we do. We don't question him. So I'd look for the older brother or sister that Tai mentioned, and they would magically conjure sweet rice of 5 different colors. And we would all gather outside of Tai's hut on his deck, and we would enjoy this for breakfast. We didn't have to wait until it was a special day or a special occasion. Tai always made it a special occasion, every moment. And even when we would just need to move from hamlet to hamlet, Tai might say, "Are you ready?" And I would look at Tai and say, like, "Ready for?" And he would say, "To go to the next hamlet, to go to Upper Hamlet," from Lower Hamlet, for example, in Plum Village. And the way he asked it was always very exciting, kind of like it's an adventure. And of course, everybody around him would be like, "Yeah, okay, let's go." So it didn't matter what the external conditions were, whether it was a rainy day, a sunny day, whether there were many people or not many people. Tai always was able to transmit to us by his embodiment of seeing each moment as wonderful. And you may think, well, that's easy for him to say, or for him to do. He's like a Zen master. But actually, Thai lived through 2 wars in Vietnam. Can you imagine a person who has gone through so much trauma and yet can emerge as a Zen master, can teach us the art of living, the art of happiness, and the art of suffering? I've never heard of the art of suffering before Thai. I've always been taught that suffering is something that you evade by all costs. You ignore it as if it doesn't happen. You procrastinate it until it festers and there's no other way but to face it when it's already become bloated and very disfigured and has morphed into maybe 100-fold more than what it originally started with. But Thai taught us how to not see that suffering is a bad thing and happiness is a good thing, but to see that they inter-are and that we can take good care of them alongside each other. We don't have to eliminate one to keep the other. Now, how does this relate to being an artist? Many of us may think, well, I'm not an artist. I don't paint for a living, or I don't sculpt for a living, or maybe you do. Maybe you do paint for a living. Maybe you do sculpt for a living. But when you're a practitioner and you practice meditation, you automatically become an artist because we learn the art of living. I always thought to myself as a novice, what is the big deal? Why does Thai always emphasize the art of happiness and the art of suffering? I think the crows also agree. They're knocking in the back. Or maybe they disagree. And I came to realize that the lifelong quest of a human being, as well as many beings, is the search for happiness. We're all taught different forms and different formulas of happiness. You have to get a good education, you have to get a good job, you have to get a good life partner, get a house, get a fancy car, get a position in life, etc. All of these are ideas of happiness. But plenty of us achieve all of these and beyond. And yet we have to re-examine to see the level and quality of happiness that we have. Is it long-lasting? Is it meaningful? How can we enhance it and maintain it? As a child, I always questioned this formula of happiness because I saw plenty of adults around me who achieved all of these so-called successes in life, but they were mean to their own family members. And I thought family was supposed to be a safe and happy place. Isn't that what we're all taught? We see it in advertisements, we see it in stories and movies all around us. But then again, when I looked at myself, I was always mean whenever I was cranky or upset, because we're bound to these ideas. It has to be like this, it has to be like that. Otherwise we become self-righteous. And then we don't speak to each other for years or for months or for days. And then I realized that usually when we have a block in the communication, whether it's with our family members, our coworkers, any other human, it's usually because we don't feel our suffering is acknowledged. We don't feel seen or heard. And so what happens when we are overflowing with suffering? We're taught that we should punish those who make us suffer. But for example, even if we say something or do something that seems like we've punished the one who has caused us suffering. Let's say a child's with the parent. The child may become disobedient or speak back or get its way in its little revenge way that it can. But at the end of the day, do we really feel better or do we feel worse? Or how long does it last, this split feeling that we've gotten our revenge? So then I thought, instead of waiting for someone else to recognize my suffering, to acknowledge my suffering, to wait for approval from someone else outside where it's really out of my control, if I follow the teachings we've been given, which is to balance the joys, the sorrows, to just sit still and to breathe mindfully with both the joys and the sorrows, just like you would with a friend. When someone is overflowing with despair, with sorrow, sometimes all we need to do is sit next to them and let them cry for as much as they need to, for as long as they need to let it all out. I often resort to this example, which for me is a normal human function, but I guess I should still give a disclaimer in advance in case some of us don't feel the same. An example I often resort to when I think of suffering is when we need to vomit. I remember as a child, the first time I had to vomit, and I remembered it, it was such an awful feeling. It's a violent bodily function where the body has to expel things that it cannot digest. And I couldn't vomit everything all in one go, so it was really painful. I'd vomit a little bit, and then rest, and then out of the blue I'd vomit some more, and it kept continuing until I would vomit the green substances and yellow substances, and then finally when there was nothing left, it was completely empty, then that's the moment where I started to be able to fully rest and gradually heal and gradually resume my normal health and not feel sick like when I experienced indigestion. And it's the same with our everyday suffering. Whether it's our strong emotions, whether it's suffering we feel that is inflicted upon us by others. So I would like to invite everyone to take some time to reflect on your levels of true happiness and your levels of suffering, and to see where you're at in mastering the art of happiness and the art of suffering. To see what were the elements that we experienced in this retreat at our monastery here that you can bring back home and continue at home. Why? Because when we are an artist, we can choose the media we want to use for our piece of art. We can choose different colors, different textures. And it's the same with our lives. We can allow suffering or happiness to naturally take its course. Of course, when we're happy, we're feeling well, we'll experience a high, and then lows, and then highs, and then lows. And it's the same with suffering. Even if you don't do anything with it, it will naturally go away on its own accord, because nothing lasts forever without the foods that sustain it. But when we choose to take good care of both our well-being and our ill-being, our lives can become much more enhanced and meaningful. And we may think the art of mindful breathing is so simple. All you need is 5 minutes and you think you've mastered it. But that's also true if you can pick up a pen or a pencil, make a few lines, squiggly lines. But if we continue to hone this art, it will kind of be like building this size of a meditation hall here, but instead of with the different bamboo blocks or the blocks of wood, we can build a ginormous meditation hall like this with our mindful breaths. How many pieces of wood do you think it took to build this big meditation hall here? Any wild guesses? Do you think maybe a few thousand? Any takers? More? More or less? More? What about a few 100,000? Is that too much? Less? Okay. So what about our meditation hall that is built of our mindful breathing? How many mindful breaths do you think it would take to build a meditation hall as big as this, for us to take refuge in and to find solace in, to nurture our inner peace and inner solidity? Do you think 5 breaths is enough? What about 200 breaths? Or maybe 400,000 breaths? More? More. What about 500,000 breaths? Okay, it sounds almost like we're doing an auction, but a very slow one. Might be 2 million mindful breaths. So in the same way, every time we encounter a conflict in our lives, we may need 200,000 mindful breaths before we find the inner calm, the inner peace. And in this way, we are hugging our conflict with these thousands of mindful breaths. We're creating a big meditation hall to embrace this conflict. And when we become calm and lucid, we can see more clearly the roots that have brought about, the different elements that have brought about this situation. And we can be creative in thinking, what can we inject into this situation to improve it? How about a little bit more deep listening? How about a little bit more loving speech? Can you ever have enough of that? I wonder. And I'd like to give an example, actually, of one of the ways that Tai has transmitted his creativity to the community. As many of us know, Tai is an author of many books. He is also a skilled storyteller. And aside from just being a skilled storyteller, he's also very creative in weaving in the Dharma doors to enhance this original story. I have always been moved by one of the stories that Thai would often tell us. And it is the story of Lady Nam Soong, Thieu Nam Soong. How many of us know this story? It's a story that I think almost all children in Vietnam are told. It's a very sad story. This is roughly the story. Sometimes there are different details, but the same storyline is the same. So in Vietnam, there was a couple, a young couple, who recently got married, and unfortunately the husband had to go to war, and this young wife was at home alone, and she gave birth to their son, and she raised their son alone. And during his absence, as this child grew, the son would often be ridiculed by his friends or by the neighborhood kids, and they would tease and taunt and say, "You don't have a father, you're no good," and awful things like that. So he would go home and he would ask his mom, "Mom, where's my dad? Everyone is teasing me at school and in the neighborhood." And naturally, this mom felt terrible, and she didn't know how to explain to him that his dad had gone away in war for a noble cause. So she improvised an answer. It was at night, and she lit an oil lamp to use at night because they didn't have electricity. And her shadow was cast on the wall. So she pointed to the shadow and she said, there is your father. Join your palms, or put your hands together to greet your father. That's a common way of being polite in Vietnam when young children greet adults. And so this boy believed that the shadow was his father. So he would talk to the shadow and play with the shadow. And after some years, the husband came back from war alive, and this young couple rejoiced in this happy news. And it was custom of the time for the wife to go buy a few items to make a feast to celebrate her husband coming home from the war. And during her absence, the husband, the father, then beckoned his son and said, "Come, let me play with you. I can give you like a piggyback ride." And he tried to teach his son to call him father. And the son took one look at him and said, "You're not my father. You don't look like my father. My father only comes at night. And every time that he comes, my mom cries. Whenever she sits down, then he sits down. Whenever she lies down, he lies down. You're not my father." Can you imagine this man's reaction, this husband's immense suffering that mounted up in him? If you were him, in his shoes, would you have also felt a sense of betrayal? That how could my wife cheat on me with someone during my absence when I was doing a noble cause going to war? So immediately his heart closed, and then he became cold, and he didn't say a single word anymore. And when his wife returned home, she was very shocked and taken aback at the sudden change of atmosphere in the house. And she tried to still go on with cooking the fancy dishes to celebrate his coming home, but he disengaged, and he didn't look at her, he didn't include her. And it's also custom for the husband, upon coming back from a trip like that, to roll out a straw mat in front of the altar, to light a stick of incense in front of the ancestral altar, to both announce and also give gratitude to the ancestors, to announce that he made it back from the war alive, well, and also to thank the ancestors for protecting him. And normally, both the husband and wife would be able to touch the earth before the altar. But as soon as the husband finished, he rolled up the mat and put it away as if she didn't exist. And that was a very big insult for her. And she felt deeply wounded because she didn't know what was going on. Why was he punishing her? So you can also imagine the immense suffering in this wife, not knowing what she did wrong for him to suddenly react so coldly like this. And then, after a period of time like this, she couldn't bear this coldness, this heaviness in the household, and he also couldn't bear it. So he would leave at night to go drink, and he would get home drunk very late. So they would not have any communication, and it came to the point where it was so unbearable that she went to a river nearby and jumped into the river and took her life. For her, she felt there was no other way to prove her innocence, that she didn't do anything wrong, and she didn't understand why she was being punished. For this man, having heard that she jumped into the river, he simply thought, well, that's what you get. You deserved it. So he went home, he took care of his son, and he figured they would continue on, the two of them. But as soon as nightfall came, as soon as he lit the light and the oil lamp and on the wall, his shadow was cast on the wall, the young boy shouted, he exclaimed in glee, there's my father. Mister, come, let me introduce you to my father. Here's my father. Whenever he sits, my mom sits. Whenever he lies down, my mom lies down. Whenever he comes, my mom would talk to him for hours on end and cry to him. Now you can imagine this man's immense suffering upon hearing his young child recount this, because he realized that his wife was faithful to him this entire time, and she was simply trying to address his absence, which was a simple way of trying to appease his son's suffering, his son's lack of presence of his father's presence in his life. And then he felt great remorse. He had immense guilt because it was not necessary to take the life of his wife in that way. There was an altar that was set up to honor his wife's passing away and his wife committing suicide. And this has always been a tragic story that I've known as a child. And I've always just seen it as there's nothing you can do about it, because this is how we are taught. We cannot speak out. There's always an elephant in the room, because if we speak out, the way we speak might be more hurtful, and so we're taught to just not say anything. And yet Tai, our teacher, was very creative, and when he told the story, he said, why didn't they practice deep listening and loving speech? They could have easily avoided this tragic outcome. For example, upon coming home and hearing his son recount this, The father could have practiced mindful breathing upon receiving such horrid news, such appalling news. He could have stopped and practiced mindful breathing. Breathing in, I'm aware of the strong emotions that are mounting in me. Breathing out, I am here and I'm going to breathe through these strong emotions of feeling betrayed, of feeling lied to. Breathing in, even if I'm sure I should check again. Breathing out, I simply recognize what is there and I calm my body and my mind. If he had practiced mindful breathing in that moment and not reacted out of his strong emotions, he could have given his wife a chance to explain the situation. And upon her coming home, he could have asked her, "My dear, can you please help me understand? I don't understand. Upon coming home, this is what our son told me. I don't understand how you could do that to me. Is it true? What happened?" And then she could have had a chance to practice loving speech and say, "Oh no, my dear, this is what happened." And if you don't believe me, at nighttime, you can also turn on the kerosene lamp, light up the oil lamp, and see for yourself. She could have had a chance to share about her suffering, about how all these years she's missed him so much, and she didn't know how to raise her son by herself, and this is the only way she could deal with her loneliness. And then they could have understood each other's suffering, both sides, because him going away in a war, for sure he's also experienced a lot of suffering as a soldier. And for sure at home, she also experienced suffering being a single mother during the wartime, not knowing when she would see him again. So had they had the chance to practice mindful breathing, embracing strong emotions, practicing deep looking, to understand, practicing deep listening, to understand, to both acknowledge their respective suffering and also the other person's suffering, then they could have continued to live their lives, to continue to live a happy life together. So I would like to challenge each one of us as artists to master the art of happiness and the art of suffering in our everyday lives, to see how we can help others around us continue to also live a happy life, and at the same time to embrace their suffering and transform it and heal from it. How can we help both sides understand each other's suffering? Whether it is pairs in the sense of the mother, the father, and their child, so parents and children, or couples, or even in our government, or even in nations in the world. As artists, we can help the direction of the narrative. And the stories we tell ourselves, the stories we tell others, can we always find a way out of suffering? Can we always offer that to others through our artwork? Our teacher was very creative in blowing life into the Dharma. He created what's called a lazy day, which normally in Plum Village, if we experience a 7-day retreat, you get one lazy day, where there's no fixed schedule other than the 3 mindful meals, usually. Sometimes there's working meditation, if it's a cooking team, But otherwise, the spirit of this day is to let the day unfold naturally instead of trying to control things. Like you have to be productive and accomplish 20 things, 20 errands in this day, otherwise. So it's in the same spirit of total relaxation that we've practiced in our retreat as well, where we can relax every body part, whether it's our internal organs, whether it's our neck, our shoulders, to enhance mindfulness in our everyday life in a natural way. We also have, for example, changing the peg. So for example, if children in the house sense that there's tension between the parents, the child might say a code word like mom or dad or grandma or whoever the caretaker in the house is. Do we have cake in the refrigerator? And that would be code for we need to acknowledge that there's some tension in the family and see if we can water our seeds of joy and not get caught in our arguments of right and wrong, judgment and blame, but to remember that we're on the same team. Or our harmony pact, living in harmony pact. We have this harmony pact in many of our books, and you can continue to look into it, like No Bud, No Lotus, or Happiness. And this is a pact, instead of like a peace treaty with nations, it's a peace treaty within our family members. Every time that you feel anger mounting in you, you can give each other a code to pause, take care of it, and come back and talk about it in a civil and relaxed way after. What about red light meditation? Who practices that? Red light meditation. Normally when we see a red light, we want to gun it. But we can see the red light as a way to practice stopping and mindful breathing. And there's also the pact with our staircase. Our teacher had a pact with his staircase, which is every single time he went up or down the staircase, every step would be made in mindfulness. And if he was almost to the top, there's one more step left, and he realized he was forgetful, he would walk all the way down again and then start all over again. So in the same way, we can choose a similar mindful pact with something that we already do every day. And we can be creative in enhancing our everyday life because we already do it anyway. So for example, if you have a special cup or mug that you use every day, that can be your mindful cup or your mindful mug. And every time you take a sip, you can say to yourself that every sip will be a mindful sip. And if I forget, for example, and I'm like, oh yeah, and then later I had to do this, and it's like, oh, I forgot. But I also remembered. Okay, next sip will be a mindful sip. I can notice this cup. Oh, there's like 4 lines on this cup. It's a clear glass cup. And if it's helpful, you can use 2 hands instead of 1 to be fully present. So let us be creative in finding ways to sprinkle mindfulness, meditation in our everyday lives. In the same way, that you would always have time for someone who you fancy. How many of you have fallen in love before? Romantically. How many of you have suddenly had a lot of time for them? No matter how busy you were before, suddenly, oh yeah, I can meet you. Yeah, we can go on a date here or there. So in the same way, when you love someone and you find that they nourish you, you will always find time for them. And in that same way, you can always squeeze time or make time for meditation practices, even if it's a little bit every day, in the same way that you always have time to text somebody that you like. So let us be creative, and each Dharma door, whether it's mindful walking, mindful eating, mindful sitting, mindful driving, mindful playing the guitar, we can always see that each of these Dharma doors is like a Dharma note, a music note in this life song that we compose. And this song can be a song of inner freedom, of solidity, of freshness, of healing, transformation, or anything we want. So let us be creative artists even long after we've so-called left this monastery. And as a concrete gift, I would like to invite everyone to sing together the song Breathing In, Breathing Out. So we can remember, you can incorporate music into your everyday life. And these practice songs, you can write your own practice song that fits your situation the most. But to start off with, we can sing breathing in, breathing out. And remember that you can sing this anytime, anywhere, and it's like a compact monastery in the form of a practice song. And we can sing with our hand movements as well to remind us the qualities of being fresh, of being solid, of being free. And when we sing the song, let us not just sing it as a song, but really embody it as well, to remind us, if you are not a little bit more kind and fresh every day when you practice meditation, maybe there's something a little bit off. And the song can help remind us that the outcome should be that. Are you ready? With the hand movements. When we sing, we have these hand movements can help us. It's like a tangible reminder. So I'm not sure what number it is, but it's also on the song sheet if you have a song sheet. Breathing in, breathing out. Breathing in. what is real, what is true, and I feel there is space deep inside of me. I am free, I am free, I am free. Thank you, everyone. And now let us sit as solid as a mountain and enjoy 3 sounds of the bell as we practice mindful breathing and our sharing this morning. So dear friends, as we're waiting for the announcements, we can already massage our hands, our feet, our legs. We've been sitting for quite a while, and so this is a concrete way of expressing love to our bodies. Thank you.
So very big thank you to Sister Brightness, who has once again managed to bring light into our lives and our hearts with her wisdom, her teachings, her experience, and her beautiful music, singing voice. Thank you. Are there any people here who have just arrived for the day? Could you please put up your hand? 2, 3. Okay.